The auctioneer dropped the gavel at $60, and the loudest man on the lot laughed at him in front of the whole crowd. Harlan Boe did not laugh back. He just lowered his hand, the bid already his, and looked up at what he had bought, a great dead heap of pipe and cabinet standing off by itself against the fence at the edge of the salvage lot, a massive theater pipe organ, its carved console gone black with grime under a towering rank of tall metal and wooden pipes, the blower dead and half the keys stuck fast, the whole monster pigeon fouled and silent, hauled out of the guts of a torn-down movie palace and left where the wrecking crew dropped it. The demolition men had pulled it from a picture house they were tearing down and shoved it to the far fence. And 100 pickers had walked past it as too heavy to move and too filthy to bother with, so plainly did the crowd read it as nothing but firewood and scrap tin. Harlan had just paid $60 to own it, dead blower and stuck keys and a ton of grime and all. It was a bright, clear Saturday morning, the kind of hard light that comes off a gravel yard at the end of summer. At a demolition and estate salvage sale in the fenced lot of a wrecking company on the edge of a small county town. Harlan was 73 years old, lean and a little stooped now but sure in the hands, with a deeply lined face gone soft and weathered, close-cropped white hair under a flat cap, wire spectacles pushed up his nose, and pale, patient eyes that took their time. His hands were broad and careful, the fingers still steady, the way a man stays steady when he has spent a life setting small things right. He had worked that trade in his young years, a tuner and a voicer of organs, the one the churches and the theaters sent for when a rank went sour or a chest went dead or a stop would not speak. Until the picture palaces closed and the theater organ went the way of the silent film that fed it, and the old men who could voice a pipe by ear were quietly closed out. He had made his living since as a picker and a junkman, but the ear never left him. The man who laughed was Dorset Vale, who ran the biggest salvage and scrap yard in 3 counties. A heavy-set man of about 55, in a loud teal-blue windbreaker he wore to be seen in, his face clean-shaven and ruddy, a thick gold ring on one hand and a stub of a cigar in the other. $60, Dorset said, loud, so the whole lot could hear it. $60 for a busted organ that don't even play, junkman. The blower's dead, the keys are stuck, the pipes are full of pigeon mess. And the whole heap's dead weight takes 6 men and a truck just to slide it. Nobody's had one of these monsters make a sound in 50 years. You can't play it, you can't sell it, and you can't hardly move it. You didn't buy an organ, old-timer. You bought a heap of pipe and firewood. And you paid $60 to haul it home when I'd have run the whole thing through the crusher and paid you for the tin. He coined the name right there, loud enough to carry, the old man's coffin organ, and it stuck for the rest of that month, because a tall black console under a rank of silent pipes did look like nothing so much as a great upright casket. The crowd laughed because Dorset laughed, the way a crowd does. Harlan stood through it without a change in his face, his hands folded quiet in front of him, and let the laughter pass, the way weather passes a man who has decided to stand in it. Now, if you have ever watched a quiet, capable man get talked over by a loud one, if you have ever known somebody whose skill the world used when it needed something and forgot the rest of the time, then you already understand what this channel is about, and you might take a second to subscribe. Because the people who stay for stories like Harlan's are who Iron Hook Stories was built for. Harlan said nothing. He had learned a long time ago that work does not answer to noise. What Dorset Vale could not have known, grinning behind his cigar, was that Harlan had stood in front of that dead monster with a lifetime of the organ trade awake in him. The crowd saw a filthy heap against a fence. Harlan saw the instrument, under the grime, the console carved and joined heavy and true by a real hand, the ranks laid out deeper and finer than any parlor organ ever needed, the pipework scaled to a hall, and a swell box built with a care no cheap builder ever bothered with. This was a builder's, not a factory instrument knocked out by the dozen. Above all, he knew that a proud old organ builder who made a thing like this almost always tucked its truth where the world would never think to look, a brass nameplate screwed to the console, and the original papers slipped into a slot inside the swell box where no stranger would ever reach. Harlan knew the difference between a scrap organ and a great one somebody had let die, and what he found that night would engrave a forgotten name and the record of the palace that organ had sung in back into a history that had struck them both out. Harlan had come up hard. He went to the organ loft young, apprenticed to an old theater organ man, learning the reeds and the flues and the long patient feel of a rank until a sour pipe came sweet and a dead stop spoke clean under the hand. His wife Nella had died after a long illness, and they had buried no family of their own, and after she was gone he lived alone in a small house behind his old shed with his rows of tools and his quiet. The town had a use for his hauling and no use at all for his ear. He knew that. A man who had voiced the ranks of 100 old organs could no more walk past a great theater organ going for scrap than walk past his own past. So he bid, because he had seen that somebody built it to hold the thing that mattered most. If you've made it this far into Harlan Boe's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. He let them sell the rest of the salvage first, the torn-out seats and light fixtures and boxed theater hardware knocked down to the pickers, while Harlan waited by the fence beside the towering dead organ. When the auctioneer finally came to it and called for a bid, Dorset glanced up, called out his joke. And not one other hand went up. Harlan raised one finger, and the gavel came down at 60. He paid cash, signed the slip, and arranged to bring a flatbed and a crew around at the end of the day because a theater pipe organ was a killing thing to move whole. The story got around the town before Harlan's trailer was off the county road. By Monday, people who had not spoken 20 words to him in years stopped him outside the feed store to ask, grinning, whether he was going to stand his coffin up in the yard and play his own funeral to get his $60 back. Ned Marsh, who ran the hardware counter, said it plainer that there was nothing to a dead theater organ but pigeon mess and firewood and no music left alive in it to raise. Harlan was buying a case of cleaning oil, a set of fine-tuning tools, and a box of clean rag, and did not look up. "We'll see," he said, and that was the whole of his answer. He had spent a life learning that an instrument is either a maker's or it isn't, and the noise a crowd makes has nothing to do with which. But Harlan did not open the organ up in the daylight, with the pickers' trucks still on the lot and Dorset holding court by the auction table. He waited until the place had emptied out and he had the great console home, craned down off the trailer and stood square against his shed wall under a single work lamp and went at it alone that night after the town had gone quiet. He did not tear into it. He knew that an instrument like this keeps its truth deep inside the cabinet, and that you reach those places slowly, the way you reach into anything a careful hand once closed up. He wiped the grime back off the console a hand's width at a time, and eased the swell shutters open and worked the stuck trackers loose until the action began to move again under his fingers. And when he ran his hand along the console rail below the keys, he stopped, because there was a smooth plate screwed there under the filth that was not the raw wood a maker leaves where no eye falls. And inside the swell box behind the shutters, his fingers found a narrow slot, fitted and finished with a care that made no sense unless it was holding what lay behind it. Down at the diner they were still asking if he had burned his coffin for kindling yet. Harlan wiped the little plate clean with his thumb and began to work the folded papers out of the slot that a proud maker sets where the world would never look. The organ had its own long, hard history, and the town had let it go for scrap without once asking after it. It ran back to the man who built it, a self-taught American theater organ builder of no fame in his own time, who had learned the pipe and chest trade alone in a Rivertown shop, in an age when the great factory organ houses already had the big city theaters sewn up. And it ran back to the one house that organ was built to sing in, the Rialto, a small, independent picture palace in a hard-luck town that had commissioned this great instrument for the stage it meant to fill for a generation. The maker built and voiced it far beyond any ordinary commission because he meant once to build the best thing he was capable of. But the Rialto went dark in the hard years when sound film and the slump emptied the small houses, and was wound up so completely that its very name was struck from the county's amusement rolls, and the organ drifted from lot to lot as an oversized heap nobody could place, until it was torn out of a torn-down building and shoved against a salvage fence 2 generations from where it was built, no one alive remembering that a great maker had built it or that a palace had ever filled its dark. With that sound, and tucked in the swell box, slipped there the last hard season the house stood, lay the builder's own original opus ledger and the shipping bill for this exact instrument, folded in with a bundle of letters from the one who played it to the end, a woman named Adeline Reyes, the Rialto's house organist, whose name the receivers had struck clean out of the playbill and the town's record along with the theaters, so that the one who gave the place its voice was the one most thoroughly erased. The maker himself died poor and unknown, his finest work sealed up around a dead palace's own papers and a struck-out woman's own words. What none of them ever asked was what becomes of the record a dying palace trusts to its organ and the name of the one who played it when both the house and the maker are forgotten. The answer had been leaning against a salvage fence the whole time, tucked in the swell box of a $60 organ nobody wanted. Harlan found the papers a little after midnight. A folded sheaf slipped deep in the narrow swell box slot that a stranger would have passed 1,000 times and never felt. He drew them out, and the old paper came loose with a soft, dry rustle a lifetime in the waiting, and he laid them open under the lamp. There was a heavy ledger sheet going amber with age, and folded around it a thick bundle of letters bound in faded ribbon. Harlan lifted them out under the lamp, and when he had the ledger sheet open and read the fine, sure hand that had ruled and entered every line of it, he set it down and stood very still. This was the maker's own opus ledger, the builder's private record of every instrument he ever finished, each one numbered and named and set down in his hand, and this organ's own entry stood there in the column. Its opus number and the name of the house it was built for entered plain, and folded with it was the shipping bill for this exact instrument, the crated ranks and console billed out by rail to the Rialto the year it was installed, and the letters in another study hand were signed at the foot of each one by the woman who had played that consul, Adeline Reyes. Writing the month, the doors closed to the manager, who could no longer pay her, telling him the plain truth of what the palace had been, and swearing the organ was sound. A woman doing the one honest thing left to do, in a place that was about to forget she had ever done it. But the papers and the letters were only half of it. Harlan went back to the console now, drawing the small lamp in close along the rail below the keys, and there, screwed to the wood under the grime where only a maker's eye would ever catch it, was the builder's engraved brass nameplate. The organ builder's own name and his Rivertown cut proud in the metal, and beneath it the opus number the trade had only ever half believed was real. A great one-of-a-kind theater organ, the only one of its build the man ever finished. And that number matched the entry in the opus ledger, line for line, and matched the shipping bill made out to the Rialto. Harlan sat down on his shed stool and understood that the coffin the town had laughed at for a month was a rare, complete, one-of-a-kind theater pipe organ by a great forgotten builder, museum grade to anyone who knew that name, worth a small fortune restored, and worth far more than money as the keeper of a lost palace's own papers and the words of a woman the record had struck out. The next morning, Harlan did not call a scrap yard, and did not run the pipes through the crusher for the metal, and did not gut the console into one of those rustic salvage wood bars or a novelty pipe lamp for his own shed, and a few in town thought him a fool a second time. He let them. He had spent one whole month being the man who paid $60 for a coffin. And he did not mind being thought a fool by people who had never once been right about the thing in front of him. He carried the brass nameplate and the opus ledger and the letters to a theater organ museum and restoration society, and to a county archivist who knew what a maker's own opus record and a struck name meant, and set himself to the harder thing, to engrave a forgotten maker's name, and a struck-out woman's name back into the record that had dropped them both, and to find what family Adeline Reyes had left. The curator went very still over the brass plate and said quietly that a documented one-of-a-kind theater organ by that builder, its opus number matched to his ledger and the shipping bill, was the kind of thing a museum waits a lifetime for, and had all but given up as gone, and that the man who built it had been no failed country tinkerer at all, but exactly the kind of overlooked master the record is supposed to keep, and it simply lost. And Adeline Reyes had descendants in the country still. A great-granddaughter 2 counties over among them, a gray woman who had grown up on a scrap of family talk that some old great-grandmother had played at a theater that went bust and was let go and never spoke of it, a story the family told as an old shame and mostly let go. Harlan went to her that fall with the letters and the opus ledger open to the entry in that study hand, and watched her read her own great-grandmother's world across 100 years, the plain, honest account she had made and signed the month her palace died. She put a hand flat on the table and went quiet. They had grown up thinking their old woman had been let go under some cloud the family did not name. The ledger and the letters told them instead that she had played the house to the last night and been failed only by a palace that could no longer pay and a town that struck her name out with the theaters. The woman asked why he had troubled to come so far to give a struck-out stranger's family back their grandmother's name. Harlan said only that a maker screws his name to the console where the theater's dark would swallow it, because he needs to believe somebody will someday come who can find it, so that being forgotten can never be the same as never having filled the hall at all. And that he had nobody of his own to leave a thing to, So he had brought the lost palace's record and a struck-out woman's own words home to the people they were always meant for. There was one thing more Harlan did before the organ left his shed, and he did it for the maker and for the organist and for no one else. He restored it the slow, careful, way over a season of nights, cleaned a lifetime of grime and pigeon filth from every pipe, freed the stuck keys and the dead trackers, rebuilt the silent blower until the wind came up steady, brought the ranks back on speech one stop at a time, and voiced them true until the great instrument sounded again the way it had in the palace, not to make a show of it, but because an organ a great maker had poured his life into deserved to do the one quiet thing it was made to do. He did not run the pipes through the crusher and did not gut the console into a bar or a novelty lamp, because using a rare maker's theater organ for scrap or a curiosity was the very thing that had nearly killed it, and there was no truth in it. So on the last night, with the museum's people coming in the morning, Harlan sat down at the cleaned console and drew a single stop and touched the keys, and the great instrument spoke. One true chord rising full and warm off the ranks to the rafters of the little shed, the first sound it had made in 50 years, and then he lifted his hands and let it go, quiet again. That part was never the point. He had made it whole again so that the man who built it and the woman whose nights it had carried would be heard one time by somebody who finally understood what they were. That fall the organ went where it belonged, into a theater organ museum and restoration society with the maker's name read clear at last and his rare one-of-a-kind commission named beside it. And the Rialto's name was written back into the county rolls it had been struck from, and Adeline Reyes's name written in beside it as the organist who played the house to the end, generations late, so the family that had thought their old woman let go under a cloud knew at last that she had kept faith to the last night. Word of it went around the town the same as the laughter had, only quieter, and the people who had called Harlan a fool let the name, the old man's coffin organ, drop and did not pick it up again. Dorset Vale was not run out of business and was not made a villain. He was simply a man who had laughed loud at a thing he never bothered to look inside. And the next time he held court by the auction table the others did not lean in so far. Being right was the whole of what Harlan had wanted, and it had brought a great forgotten maker's name, and a struck-out woman's name, back out of the dust. The museum kept the organ where the town could see it. They stood the great console under its towering rank of pipes in the middle of the front hall under a soft light, the wood waxed dark and the pipes cleaned to a soft silver, the blower running steady and a card set beside it showing how the swell box had kept its papers, the rare one-of-a-kind theater organ of a great forgotten maker. Built for a palace that went dark in a hard season and restored to the maker's name at last, and tucked in its swell box the original opus ledger and the shipping bill and the name of the organist, Adeline Reyes, whom the record had struck out and this instrument had kept. And on a still evening that next spring, the light going gold through the tall front windows, Harlan Boe drove over to look in on it, and there in the last of the sun stood the organ, whole and cleaned and heard at last, the pipes glowing soft silver where a stranger's hands had finally reached them. Harlan was 73 years old, a man the auction had laughed at one whole month, and he stood quiet a long moment and laid one broad careful hand flat on the cool console wood beside the maker's brass nameplate and nodded once, the way a man nods at a job that was done right. The work had said it for him, the way work always did. A maker tucks a lost palace's own papers inside the swell box and screws his own name to a console the dark will swallow, trusting that somebody will come who can find what his hands made and voiced. So that being forgotten for a lifetime can never be the same as never having filled the hall at all, and a town rarely knows what greatness or whose good name was left to rot at its own fence line until somebody troubles to open the thing they laughed at. So I'll leave it to you. Was Harlan Boe right to give the organ to a museum under the maker's name and carry a struck-out woman's papers home to strangers without keeping any of it for himself? Or was that one decency too far in a world that had laughed at him for nothing? Tell me which one in the comments, and I'll read them.